Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Scott Bonner. Welcome to A State of Mind Studios, Scott. How are you?
Good, thanks.
We're going to be talking about the upcoming fixture, Celtic against Rangers. You have a great insight into another challenger in Hibs, and you're a long-time Hibs fan, so we'll be speaking to you about your thoughts on Jack Ross, John Potter and the current Hibs side, because of course Hibs have already faced Rangers and these have faced Celtic. And you can give us your views on the upcoming game, Scott. The headlines have been more or less all about the players that are going to be missing. That's what's dominated the headlines this week. And at the moment, we've got 4 casualties of COVID at Celtic Park. Nir Bitton and his countryman El Hamid, as well as Odsonne Edouard and Ryan Christie, all appear to be out. I know that Edouard will be back on Friday, but I don't know if it would be a good idea to throw him into the action. If anything, Scott, I reckon he'll be on the bench. If you're a footballer and you've not played for a couple of weeks, would you probably be better off sitting on the bench if you've had this illness? I would suggest, if anything, it'll be a substitute appearance for Edouard.
Put him on for the last half hour, but he's no the most mobile of players as it is, I would say, being a Hibs fan looking in. So if he's had that illness, then that could affect his performance, I would say, if you were putting him on for the start.
I think so. I've been looking at the strikers. It's one of the biggest concerns, hence the leading headline, do Griffiths and Jullien start for Celtic? Because at the minute, although Celtic have got 4 strikers who are all scoring goals, you know, at the moment, Klimala's probably the fittest of the 4. He's the guy that, if you're looking at match fitness, he's got it in abundance. Edouard was struggling a wee bit before international duty, and then, of course, he tested positive, so he is currently ill and won't be going through the normal training regime. And then you've got Ajeti, who's been injured. He's coming back from injury. And then Griffiths, who hasn't been injured as such, but he's only got 20 minutes of first-team action over and above a friendly game and a bounce game against Motherwell. So the big question is, you know, you're talking there about Edouard getting the last half hour. I don't think that's a bad shout. Do we get Griffiths on to start, or do you give Klimala with his legs the first half hour? As a footballer again, Scott, you know, give all 3 of them half an hour. You know, give Ajeti half an hour. It's very unusual to see anybody, you know, starting a game and being pulled off before half time. But under the circumstances, I would give Klimala the first half, see how he gets on, and maybe look at Griffiths to come on in the second half. I don't know if Edouard will be fit.
Even for me, something like Griffiths, he plays on the adrenaline of the game. So I don't know if the fitness in that would be as crucial as somebody like Griffiths in a game like that, because I think he's got that enthusiasm and he plays it like he's still a bairn. And Griffiths is a goal scorer for me. So if you get somebody up there that's got to do a lot of the running for him, play 2 up front maybe, and then Griffiths playing off him.
The big thing again is the 2 up front. It's not something that Neil Lennon always utilises, Scott, and much to the frustration of a lot of the fans. But in a game like this, I can see him going with 1 up front, and the big question would be who, probably with someone like El Yunusi playing off him. And then the other big question.
I think playing with the 1 up front against Rangers, you're letting their fullbacks into the game.
Their fullbacks? Aye. And that's a big danger.
A big part of them, and then obviously with Kent. So maybe with 2 wider players that pins their fullbacks back, that would allow not so much running for if you've got all these strikers that are got illnesses or if they're coming back for injury. So maybe 2 wide players and cheat a bit. Just stay high, stay wider, and then keeping Tavernier. Is it the
Barisic left back?
Then that'll sort of pin them back.
That would suit me, because I mean I would identify them, and it's not because I know what I'm talking about. I think quite obviously they're 2 of Rangers' best players, Scott, and then you've got obviously the AFER referenced Kent and perhaps Hagi as well to look out for if they're fit. But you could nullify the 2 fullbacks, couldn't you?
Definitely.
With Frimpong. The question is on the left is, you know, has Taylor, who's been starting most of the games for Celtic, has he got the ability going forward? We know that Laxalt has. We've not seen him in the flesh, but obviously looking at how he's performed for his country and for his previous clubs in Italy, he's certainly got that ability to go down the left. It wouldn't surprise me if that was Neil Lennon's game plan. Now, you're a Hibs fan. and we welcome you onto the show, Scott. What's your memories of Lenny when he was in charge of Hibs? What kind of style of play did Hibs utilise whilst Lenny was in charge?
Well, I thought Lennon done well at Hibs. He gave us a bit of steel as well, a bit of grit in the team. They played football. There was a lot of good. They signed a few good players. I enjoyed watching Hibs when Lennon was there.
Another big thing that always catches my eye and my interest as well, Scott, is the amount of Hibbies that go off the rails, right? And I mean that in the best possible way, because we've had a few of them at Celtic Park. Players like Derek Riordan and Anthony Stokes seems to be the latest addition to that list. But you've also had guys like Gary O'Connor and various others down the years. What is it with Hibs players that just seem to, their potential is not fulfilled? Guys like Stokesy and O'Connor and Riordan. What is it about Hibs? Is there something in the water down in Leith?
To be fair, it might even be, see when they're coming through in the youth level, if they're not getting picked up on their attitudes, because it's maybe, if Hibs like a Celtic or Rangers like a Riordan or that when they're younger, so they maybe let their boundaries be that wee bit further out in their attitude, so then that comes through when they get into the, like, giving them all like all this money, like 2-3 grand when they're young laddies, and it maybe affects them. Whereas I think if you worked on the mental side there and their attitude when they're younger coming through the academies, you've maybe not got as many of these problems. And I think money's a big thing to do with that, when you're throwing them £2,000-3,000 a week, and then it just snowballs, and they're maybe still seeing people for the areas that they were for when they were younger and things like that, and then it ends up becoming a drinking culture and whatever it is, and they maybe go off the rails that way. Because for me, Riordan's one of the best players that Hibs have had for, I don't know, decades.
Yeah.
He could have been an exceptional player. I remember
Absolutely.
being at a game against Kilmarnock. He scored a hat-trick, and I was actually sitting there and I was saying to myself, Hibs are on the verge of creating a team here that could actually win the league. And that wasn't long before Rod Petrie decided to dismantle it for millions of pounds and set us back again. We were on the verge of something there. If they'd just backed Mowbray, gave him a couple of £1 million, maybe got a couple of other players and got all the young laddies on longer contracts, but typical Hibs who went the other way.
Looking at it from a Celtic perspective, you do sometimes see a burgeoning group of youngsters coming through, or a team, Scott, elsewhere that seems as though they might do something. You remember back, dare I say, the Hearts side under Burley, it looked as though they could have done something, and then somebody interferes and starts breaking it up. Now, when you're looking at the Hibs players, the other one, and we'll go back to this later on in the conversation once we chat to some of the comments coming through, your Scottish Cup winning side in 2016, a couple of the big players there had the Celtic connections, obviously, so did the manager, Stubbsy, but we had Henderson and Stokes. And again, going back to your point you made about Riordan, watching Stokes, most of the games he played for Celtic, actually, I thought that was a talent, Anthony Stokes. What do you do with a guy like that who's in his early 30s and it looks as though he's going to be lost to certainly the top flight game? Is there any way you can get into his psyche? Is it too late for somebody like Stokes?
It's too late for some of them. They're just set in their ways of maybe not got that burning desire inside them to do what they were doing when they were 20, 21. I think they're set in their ways. Stokes, like, even when the Scottish Cup game, I think that was the best game he played for a few months, to be fair with
right.
Hibs. Don't get me wrong, he's a legend. He's won the Scottish Cup for the Hibs, but he hadn't played well for weeks and weeks before that, and then he turned it on in the game that mattered. But I think he was already on that slippery slope.
Right. Yeah.
Even at that time. So what was that, 4 years ago? So he's in his late 20s.
Yeah.
He's always had sort of problems with managers,
He does.
Like even
Discipline.
Was it at Sunderland as well?
It was.
It was the same sort of thing.
In fact, was Roy Keane not his manager?
Maybe. So he had the same sort of problems then when he was younger.
Yeah.
So he's always had that in his makeup. And then obviously as the years go on, the managers are maybe not putting up with it as much, because obviously he's then a senior player.
Absolutely, yep, and he can lead some youngsters astray as well. But it's unfortunate. And the other two, not that this is going to be a Hibs state of mind today, Scott, but the other two players that I'll speak about are, of course, two very important parts of the Celtics side on Saturday, hopefully, Scott Brown and Lee Griffiths. What was your memories of a young Bruni at Easter Road?
Oh, totally different player from what you see him now, obviously, but he was direct, fast, tenacious, scored goals. you could tell at a young age, even I think it was a Scottish Cup game we played St Mirren. He was about 17, and he was a leader even then, dragging the team forward and everything. And like you were saying earlier, like, so I think the best teams are always based on youth if they're coming through. So Celtic, in my memory, has always had Celtic players like your McStays and everything. I think that, like, Scottish football's maybe losing that a bit.
Yeah.
It's good that Hibs have went and bought Nisbet. I think Jack Ross is doing well there. So years ago, would Nisbet have ended up at Parkhead? I think he would have. When you think of like your Murdo McLeods, Davy Provins, again, it's like years gone by. But Celtic were always notorious for buying players like that. And I was doing obviously we've been involved in football and that as well, with kids football and everything. But in 1989 or something, if you like, they reckon that or 86 and 89 before the World Cups, like the majority of players were all Scottish. They were at every team.
Yep.
And that's when we used to qualify for all these tournaments, and then introduced pro youth, and then the influx of all the foreign players and that. And then since France, we've never qualified for anything, and gradually that number got less. So if you look at the Celtic team for the 80s, Aberdeen, Rangers, Dundee United, they're all Scottish players.
Absolutely.
But now we're frightened to go and buy these young laddies for the lower leagues because, like, we've got to go and spend £5 million, or Hibs have got to go and get somebody for another country.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
But there is an abundance of talent in these leagues, but we didn't look at it anymore.
No, you're right. I mean, you mentioned Murdo McLeod, and I do remember reading that at that time, when Celtic were interested in McLeod, the striker at Dumbarton at the time was Graham Sharp, who obviously went on to Everton in great success. And Celtic were interested in the pair of them. But the thinking at that time, because it was Billy McNeil who was in charge by then, 1978-79 season, just before my time, Scott, was that there's no way you could buy two players from a lower league club and for both of them to be a success. That was the thinking, so we went for McLeod, and it was an excellent signing. But you're right, we were constantly doing that, plucking players out. And I think
Aberdeen with St Mirren, Billy Stark and everything, Peter Weir, Scanlon, like all good players. Like, but and they were all coming through. They were like, there was like, I've heard you on your shows before, like about reserve football and that, but there's nowhere for the young laddies to go. It's a big bottleneck. And although we've got a bigger talent underneath, there's nowhere for all that talent to go, and everybody's scared to give them a run in the first team. And if they do, they get 5 games or so, or 6 games, and they've got to really produce in the games, But then
absolutely,
there's no, and there is even more talent now, I think, than there was back then.
That's what I find interesting. And then we had all
the players doing England as well.
Yeah.
So you had the Scottish players on the Scottish teams like Celtic, Rangers, they were all predominantly Scottish players, and then you had them all doing in the big clubs in England. Just about every big club,
I know. What saddens me, what I find really interesting is what you said there about the youth players are there. The talent is there, and you're going back to when you played, and obviously you progressed to Hibs yourself as a youngster, so you've seen it, and you can compare your kind of era to the current era because you're involved in youth football. So the talent's there, and it's about getting them from the kind of youth game into the first team, and that's where we fall down big time, isn't it?
Massive. But I think a lot of it's fear. Like, they're frightened to put them in. They'll wait till they're 22 and then start gaining them again. By the time they're 22, they should have about 100 games under their belt if they're going to be good enough.
You see a lot of players getting freed from Celtic Park, even this kind of pre-season, Scott, where you'll see a tweet coming out from the guy saying, 13 great years at Celtic. The boy's 21. He maybe never played a first team game. That's astonishing, isn't it? And I mean,
how long does it take you to recognise the fact that he's not going to be good enough?
It's a shame for the player. There's a huge investment, obviously, by the class, a huge investment by the club. They're doing that, but so that they either get a ready-made player at the end of it, or they can sell them on like they have done in the past, and in the more recent kind of past with Tierney. But I find it fascinating. The other Celtic player I did mention there, and I was delighted to see him coming back against St Johnstone, was Lee Griffiths. Prolific player at Easter Road. How do Hibs fans look back on his time with Hibs?
It was brilliant at Hibs. Scored goals out of anyone. It's the way he hits the ball early. As I said earlier, I think he's got that enthusiasm for football. He's just, I know, like he gets some bad publicity and everything, but he just loves the game. He's maybe just getting misdirected or something, but I think he's a great player. I'd get him back in the team if it was me.
And he's not a bad guy, is he really, Scott?
He'll not be a bad guy.
No.
I mean, he maybe just makes bad decisions, but I'm sure a lot of people have done that.
We've all done it. Do you see a time maybe near the end, but probably a lot of people would say earlier on this season it might have happened, that Griff will go back to Easter Road, maybe finish his career at Hibs? You just think this romantic vision of him, he's a big Hibby, Celtic fans know that, and then that's fine because he's never let the club down whilst he's been on the park, for sure, for Celtic. Is that something that Hibs fans would accept, and would they welcome him back?
Well, I would welcome him back, even if it's for a season. But would they fit into how Jack Ross plays? Jack Ross seems to like a working team as well.
You're only getting on when he's 34 or 35 years, Scott. I mean. You know, there's a few years to go yet.
So, if you could, like, even just like the nostalgia, like got him back and finish his career at Easter Road. But I think with the players that, like Jack Ross seems to have a certain type of player that he likes to bring in. I mean, you even see it with Hibs fans on, like, they're complaining the way that we're playing, if you like, but what's it? Jack Ross has been there for 8 months, so he's got to get a foundation first and then move forward. And I think the lad in Nisbet's a cracking player. In fact,
been an excellent
if
signing.
he keeps going the way he is, I can't see us keeping him for long, to be honest with you.
Well, I remember speaking to some of my Dunfermline contacts last season, and they were talking about, there was talk of him perhaps going to Dundee United at that stage, right. And they were talking 200-300 grand. Obviously, it's big money for Dunfermline, a club like the Pars, especially when you're looking at where we are now. I think the key to Hibs' success this season is the way that Jack Ross has bought. He's brought in 5 players, all from Scottish football, Scott, and they've all kicked on. They're doing well. You've had the opportunity to see Rangers 2 each at Easter Road, Celtic 3-0 at Celtic Park. If you look at the two teams as opponents, how do you see the two of them? Who's the strongest, and how do you reckon this Saturday's game is going to go?
I think a big danger for Celtic's Kent. I feel has Celtic got the legs in the middle of the park to deal with. That's what was it a 2-1 game at Parkhead last year? Yeah. I thought Brown, McGregor, they couldn't cope with him. Just his directness and everything. I just think the legs of him, skillful as well. And then obviously with the 2 fullbacks bombing forward as well. So I think that could be a danger. But Celtic have got good players and know how to win these games as well when it matters. So it's a bit like any Old Firm derby. It could go anyway. But I think it's getting closer as the year's going. Well,
at Celtic state of mind, what we try and do is be as balanced as possible, Scott, and we have said that all week, that since Gerrard started to put his team together, they've been a much tougher nut to crack, absolutely no doubt about it. The last 10 months since that defeat in December at Celtic Park's been a long time coming. This fixture's been a long time coming back round for Celtic, because I mean, when you're thinking of the actual lockdown, we had just gone up to Celtic Park to pick up our tickets for Ibrox that week. We're looking forward to that fixture. It didn't happen, and it's come around. There's been a lot happened in the interim period. Do I think Celtic have got a better squad? Absolutely. Will the 4 players missing, if Edouard is indeed missing, prove to be a pivotal factor in the final result? Potentially, because I look at the 4 players. I look at Beaton, Edouard, Christie and El Hamid. And my starting lineup certainly would have had 2 of them. Edouard and Christie would have been in there. Probably not Beaton or El Hamid. But do you throw in Jullien for his first start since we played Ross County way back on the 12th of September? So he's had a 1 month layoff as well, Scott. He had a back injury. He's getting thrown right back in there. That could be a risk, but it's all we've got at the moment. We've no other cover there for if we play with 3 at the back. Will that force Neil Lennon to play with a flat back 4? I don't think so. Going back to what you said about their full backs, we need to nullify their threat. So let's have a look at some of the points coming through from a Celtic State of Mind's followers. Now, Stephen Forbes is commenting on YouTube: with the challenging build-up Celtic are having to the derby, our rivals will be growing more confident. We can inflict a psychological impact with a convincing win, Griff to score and Jullien to start. I think it's going to be interesting when we see Neil Lennon's lineup. Sometimes at Celtic he can throw in a surprise. Was he like that when he was at Easter Road, Scott, where someone would get thrown into the starting lineup that you weren't expecting to see? And I'm thinking that someone could possibly be Klimala this Saturday.
Well, even Kamala in behind, he makes intelligent runs, I think. He's got a bit of pace about him. But I just think, I don't know, if Griffiths is back in the fold, to me, a player like Griffiths, this is set for him to come back if all the negative press and everything. He goes and gets a couple of goals and gets all the fans back on side and everything. It's just it's the type of thing that happened to somebody like Griffiths with the careers that they have, and he would thrive in what to ram with the words back down people's throats. That's what I think. That's the way I would be looking at him to motivate him.
Well, he's got that something to prove again, isn't he? Mm-hmm. And again, Neil Lennon will be looking at that. I've said on this podcast many times before, I think Lennon actually is a very good manager. I know that there's always this criticism about managers being relics or dinosaurs or tactically inept. I don't think Lenny is any of these things. I actually think he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. I mean, last season was his season. I think what we're now seeing is the development of Neil Lennon's Celtic side Mark II. He's brought in 6 players in the transfer window. So he's starting to develop his own team. He's putting his mark down on that team. And slowly but surely we're seeing more and more of Brendan Rodgers' players leaving the side. There's a few that you don't want to leave the side, be that McGregor or Brown and Edward, of course. And Griffiths was a Neil Lennon signing first time round. So this is very much looking like a Neil Lennon side. Now, John Newlands states that we still have a strong side with at least 3 informed strikers, 2 attacking wing backs with a defensive left-sided if needed, strong midfield, just lulling them into a false sense of hope. Well, John, I've been looking at, obviously, Celtic fans' views on social media, as I do all week, leading up to our bulletins. It's good to get a good sense of how Celtic fans are feeling. And on one side, on one end of the scale, we've got people who are probably a wee bit like me, actually, who are a bit cautious in the fact that we've got 4 first-teamers out at the moment. We're only on Tuesday. So we've got a few days to go before then, and we've got more international football to be played. And I'm hoping the squad isn't ravaged anymore, because I'm already on version 3 in my team lineup. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got people, Scott, who are so confident that it doesn't matter even that we've got 4 players out. I just think, I don't think Celtic will be that complacent. I don't think Neil Lennon will be that complacent. He knows the challenge that we face on Saturday. Now, I've been criticised this season for saying that Hibs are pushing to be Scotland's number 2 team, and that's only right because obviously Rangers are only pushing to be Scotland's number 1 team. So Hibs are pushing to be the second force. I certainly reckon they'll be in the top 3 this season. Scott, do you reckon there will be silverware for the first time since 2016?
Well, there's always that chance to try to win a cup, but with being a Hibs fan, we could go and play Rangers or Celtic at Easter Road and get a good result. It's a game the week after that if we have to go to St Mirren and the crowd's maybe down to 4,500 and we can't get motivated, or it's a midweek game and you come away and you get beat 3-0 and you're like, how's that? It's not even like the team's unrecognisable for the one that you just watched at Easter Road. Yep. So that's been it's a mindset, I think, that kills not just Hibs but most teams in Scotland, so that they can get up for the big games when the crowd's there, and at Tynecastle, at Easter Road, if you like, Pittodrie and everything. It's the wee games that really matter. Going to St Johnstone, but especially if you're a Hibs fan, there was only 3,000-4,000 there, 5,000. So can the players get up for that? And that's how I admire what Jack Ross has done. And now a lot of Hibs fans are complaining about the style of football, but they're gone and they're winning games of football. That's the main thing. And they're gone after they've drew 2 over Rangers, have went and followed it up with another victory, whereas we would maybe have lost that game. But so they can go and fight for second place, but as if Jack Ross can keep continuing to change that mentality. And I think even with the Rangers-Celtic game, just thinking this is probably the biggest Rangers-Celtic game for a long, long time, just with what everyone's at stake this season.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Decades, to be honest with you.
Well, you've got obviously the big one. It's 10 in a row. Celtic are going for 10 in a row. And in my lifetime, I've only been on the other side of that, trying to stop 10 in a row, back in 97, 98. So it's a massive fixture in any case. But then you add into the mix the fact that there is no guarantee that the season is going to end. I mean, that's frightening in itself, but it's become normal for us to talk like that, Scott. Never in my lifetime have I ever thought, well, the season might not finish due to X, Y and Z, but we're now in a situation where that might be the case. And because of that, you need to be in pole position. They might be looking at average points, etc. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration. And then adding into that as well, the fact that they are an improved side based on what Steven Gerrard's done compared to his predecessors. Because previous to that, I was going into every Celtic Rangers game for a spell where you're asking how much. There was a couple of occasions, the high scoring games, the 5-1 games, where we really could have put them to the sword, and I mean big time, 7, 8, 9. We were completely, dominating them in games like that. And in many ways, I wish we had, because that doesn't happen all that often with one of your nearest challengers, does it? And I remember the times where Celtic were on the wrong side of 5-1s and 4-1s in the late 80s. So you've always got to enjoy these victories when they come around. I don't think there's going to be anything like that on Saturday. And again, sometimes you get a freak result. The 6-2 game, if we're going back to Martin O'Neill's era. And I realise that there'll be people going on a Celtic State of Mind saying it's a different fixture. I'm referring to games against clubs playing out the Ibrox here. So the 6-2 game, you see Celtic coming up against a really, really strong Rangers side at that time and completely annihilating them. And a big part of that was down to the fact that we won individual battles, Scott. So wee Bobby Petr had his best game in a Celtic jersey, and he nullified the threat of Rickson at that time. So I think there's some similarities, but there's not going to be as many goals as we've seen in some of the high scoring games. And I've predicted 2-0 for Celtic. I certainly don't think it's going to be a particularly high scoring game. Now, you've mentioned already about the fans. That is another added element to this game, and the fact that there are no fans. For the first time in this fixture's history, there are no fans at the game. Sometimes people can feed on that. I know that players maybe like Scott Brown can feed on it, for and against. You've seen it up at Pittodrie where the fans are on him, or at Tynecastle, and it just motivates them even further. I think Griffiths is in that boat as well, that if fans are on top of him, it actually motivates them. How big a factor do you think that will be? I don't think for a minute that there's nobody on that pitch will be struggling for motivation, but how big a factor will it be on the game, the fact that no one's in there to watch it?
It might make it a better game. Like, no, it's 100 mile an hour and everybody's thudding
blood and guts.
Like, they might take that wee bit of pressure off a wee bit, but just the crowd not being there, so it might even... I know you're saying that it might be less goals, it might make it more goals. And I think, in a game like that, once they're over that white line, it's going to be Rangers v Celtic, to be fair as well. So I think it could end up like a better game, to be honest. A wee bit more camera on the ball, because the fans will naturally create the emotions in you. So if that's not happening round about you, you might be a wee bit more relaxed to make better decisions on the ball, if you like. So it could be a really good game.
Yep, it's an interesting one, because I have heard all the way through the years, my first ever Celtic game that I went to against Rangers was in the jungle, and I just remember looking over when they scored, and that pandemonium through the rain, and that atmosphere and the noise and the decibel level, and you can see that injecting energy into players, and you can see it demoralising players, and you can also see it over the years determining certain decisions made by officials, and all of these different things that the fans actually bring to the game, Scott. It's going to be very unusual, but we will be watching the game from a State of Mind studios here, and we'll be covering it before, during and after with our special guests, who will be announced at some point this week. We do have another special guest actually coming onto the show tomorrow. Due to the COVID restrictions, he can't travel up, but Johnny Owen will be joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. You'll remember, if you're a long time listener to the show, Johnny was on a couple of years ago talking about various things Celtic related back then, and since then he has gone ahead and made a documentary about 3 pioneers world football, and they all came from Scotland, one of them being Jock Stein, of course. And he hinted in the original interview that he might do something like that. Then the book arrived, and now we've got the film. So Johnny's going to come on live tomorrow at 2:00. I'm really looking forward to that film. There's been loads of buzz created online about it So if you want to ask Johnny any questions, fire away. And obviously, we did speak to him previously about his love of football. He's made some brilliant documentaries in the past on Brian Clough and Nottingham Forest, as well as the Welsh national side. So I'm really looking forward to that. And he will be joining us at 2:00. He'll be dialing in. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Joe Porter on YouTube. This Celtic COVID crisis actually reveals what a fantastic squad Celtic have this season. Absolutely, Joe. Does anybody think that Lenny's going to throw someone in unexpectedly? Can there be any player more unexpected to appear than maybe Klimala? Will he throw in something that we're not expecting? Will he give Laxalt his debut in a match against Rangers? These are all the different considerations. Does Jullien go straight in? Does he start with Griffiths? We've certainly got the players. And another player who made his first appearance of the season against St Johnstone is Tommy Roddick, who seems to do well against Rangers. As a manager, Scott, when you're looking at the opposition team, some players seem to do well against certain teams. Does that come in at your thinking as a manager when you're selecting your side?
Not so much myself, but even when I played it, there's certain teams that you think to yourself, I've scored 3 goals against them in 5 games, so you just naturally go out thinking that you're going to score against them. So, no, as a manager, I think you do it on who's playing well and who's training well and things like that. But as a player, certainly, when I was playing against teams, definitely.
You might have fancied it.
There was something I've actually thought that a few times. There was a few clubs that I scored a few goals against, and I was it was always in my head, I maybe got a couple of goals on Saturday. Whereas you should be thinking like that all the time, but it's, I don't know.
Go for form. Go for form, players. Yeah, I think the biggest, it might have been a surprise, it might not, is the fact that, you've actually got a player in Greg Taylor who has come in for quite a bit of criticism this season. I think he's settled down. I think the last couple of games he has played particularly well, Scott. But the big signing, the last minute signing, as it were, in the transfer deadline, is effectively someone who would be playing in Greg Taylor's position, out wide left. We've seen today, I think it was, that Paddy Roberts is away to Middlesbrough, so we can close the door on that. Everybody else closed the door on it about a year ago, but I wanted to see Paddy back at Celtic Park. Isn't going to happen. But we've got Laxalt, and I think throwing a player in, sometimes who is totally unaware of the fixture. We know Celtic's worldwide appeal. We've spoken about this derby as being a big derby across the globe. But a lot of players, if you're coming from Uruguay or if you're playing your football in Milan, Scottish football's not on your radar, and they might not really have much of a consideration for the fixture. You can throw them in and nothing's really going to faze them at that stage. You could be playing Aberdeen, you could be playing Hibs, and of course the build-up will be that Neil Lennon and his team and fellow players will obviously tell them how important the game is. But I don't think there's an issue with throwing a player straight in there, and I'm looking to see how the other people watching the show think about that. Would you throw someone like Laxalt into the team? Is that a risk? I don't think it is. Now, Sonny A, the only thing I'm worried about is Jullien. El Hamid is faster, better on the ball and better distribution, and just as solid defensively, and only weaker in the air. And I think one of Jullien's biggest plus points as a player is his distribution. And I've said this before, we've got 2 ball-playing centre halves. You've got Ayer, who loves to bring the ball down, go on a run, sometimes a galloping run, as I call them, and then distribute it to the forwards. Jullien sprays the ball over the park. And in the middle, the pivot is Shane Duffy. And he's the guy, I think, who's instilling a wee bit more of the old-fashioned defensive qualities into that back line, Scott. So Jullien is a concern for me simply because it's his first game in a month and it's a big game to throw him into.
He seems to get involved as well and gets himself into stupid positions, like just with try to get into a physical battle, then he's falling on the ground. I think some of his decision making, Jullien, defensively, don't get me wrong, he's good on the ball and everything, but defensively I think his positional sense is quite poor, and the way when he's gone up for headers and things like that, gets himself too close to strikers and that, and gives away cheap free kicks, if you like. So if he's not played for a month as well, and that could go against him just with the sharpness of your brain, if you like.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got Kent coming at you and Rangers are running at him. I think that could cause him some problems, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, John Sweeney...
He's quite erratic in his defending, I think.
I think the big thing for me bringing in Shane Duffy, and what I've certainly seen with Ajer, is that it's kind of settled down a lot of these defensive frailties that perhaps Ajer's had in the past. And I think the experience of playing with Duffy is going to do him loads of good. Already there's been interest for AC Milan, confirmed interest from AC Milan for Ajer. I certainly don't want to lose the player because I think he can develop for another season or two at Celtic Park, and we can get the fruits of that labour as well. And I think he's actually developing as a defender, playing alongside Duffy, because he's not a natural defender, Scott. We brought him in as a midfielder. He'd played earlier in his season actually up front, and he's developed into a defender, so he's still learning within that role, even though he's played first team football for a number of years now. John Sweeney is saying that Jullien needs to start as we are down to the bare bones of defenders. My worry is if Jullien or Ajer gets an injury during the game. It is a concern if you want to play with three at the back, John, and again, that'll be another consideration for Neil Lennon. I don't want us to play with four at the back because I really do think we need to target their right and left back. If you play four at the back, it's going to be harder for that to happen. And, unless it's an old school 4-3-3 or 4-4-2, can't see us going with three up front. 4-4-2, it's one of these old-fashioned formations, Scott, which was the go-to formation back in my day, but it isn't utilised as often as it used to be. Do you think that's just because it's unfashionable? Do you think teams maybe start a certain way, but at certain parts of the game, they actually revert to 4-4-2, depending on how the game's actually going?
It's more a sitting in formation, if you like, or you can have it if you're pressing and when the ball goes to the wide area. But 4-4-2 is more compact, sitting in, defensive, if like. But it depends how you play a 4-4-2. You can have it like attacking where you end up pushing on and it's like 4-2-4 and things like that. But I think it's because everybody's wanting that extra man in the middle of the park now, because it's all about possession nowadays. So it's more or less how do you utilise that extra man, and so you'll find it's all these different formations to get the foothold in the middle of the park, and I think that's where the game will be won, actually, in the middle of the park. That's what's happened in the last couple of fixtures, Scott. Quite early on, I think Stephen Gerrard realised that Celtic were overrunning Rangers in that area, but that was reversed. And you look at the League Cup final, for example, where Rangers dominated for the majority of that game. Celtic won the game, and then the game at Celtic Park, so disappointing. And again, we were a penalty kick away for getting a draw there, but it was their undoing because Rangers thought they'd won the league in December, and their season fell off the edge of a cliff after that. Celtic got the consistency and played like winners and champions, and that's exactly what happened. Now, Joe Porter is telling me that her predicted lineup is Barkas, Taylor, Frimpong, Duffy, Ajer, Laxalt, Moy, Brown, Kalmak, Griff, Klimala. 4-4-2, just as we were discussing there. Give Laxalt the freedom of the left wing with Taylor behind him for cover. There's an argument to say that we will start with four at the back, because if we do get an injury to any of the centre halves, then we really would be struggling at that stage. Some more comments coming through, and thanks everybody for getting involved. Scott Graham, your suggested lineup, and you're commenting on YouTube. For anyone else who's watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and you will get daily content free of charge. And Scott Graham's lineup is Barkas, Ajer, Duffy and Jullien, Taylor, Brown, Kalmakin and Cham, Frimpong, Laxalt and Griffiths. So loads of suggestions coming in. We've even got Kevin Graham, who was on the show yesterday, saying that IH Decorating has made a great point and that Jullien's distribution is often underlooked and not appreciated. I think it's one of the best parts of his game, Kevin. He can spray the ball all over that park, and perhaps it is underappreciated. Gary Doonan via Facebook, no big concern, beat more or less the same Rangers team twice last year with guys like Griffiths, Edouard, Moy, Elhamed all missing. Parts for all of those games, plus our squad is more strong than this time last season. I think it is stronger than last season. And Kevin goes on to say that the more players COVID positive rumour is doing the WhatsApp rounds, hopefully that's not true. Yes, we've got to wait really, don't we, until it's confirmed, Kevin, because the WhatsApp rumour mills and the online forum rumour mills would have us decimated
if 4 isn't bad enough. At what point, though, can anything be done? I think Celtic have released statements through gritty teeth due to their frustration at the fact that it appears as though nothing can be done. If Celtic start withdrawing players, then there will be sanctions that could affect even more players for Saturday or the game itself. So Celtic are having to play very safe in that respect. But at what point does it get to the stage where you've lost half a dozen first team players, 7 first team players? I know that there is a rule, and someone might be able to check this for me while we're online, that if you've got 13 first team players fit and one of them's a goalkeeper, you play the game, which means you've got a bench full of kids as well. So that would be interesting to get an update on these things. At what point, we're on Tuesday at the moment, and by the way, I don't want the game called off. Absolutely don't. I'm not calling for that. But at what point did a club need to look at this situation and then speak to the authorities? It's one of these things that's wreaking havoc, Scott, not just at top flight football, but also the clubs that you're involved in. You're involved with Haddington Athletic, and you're also involved with Portobello, and it's the under 15s, isn't it? The 06s. So you've got a good scope of the football pyramid, as it were, right down to the youth football as well. How's it affecting Haddington, and how's it affecting the kids at Portobello at the moment?
Well, starting off with the kids, I've just brought out a new rule that it's a NHS postcode. So we've got a kid that was staying in Falkirk, so he's not allowed to train or play in any games. Now, I get the severity of everything, but I understand they're isolating them, but you're trying to isolate people physically to stop it from spreading, but you're isolating the kids mentally, which is a dangerous road to go down. So that laddie's already, and there's loads of them all over Scotland, but these kids have already missed a lot of football, sat in the house, excuse me, have already missed a lot of football, sitting in the house, like the mental well-being of them, to then come back. We've done a lot of things ourselves to try and keep the kids engaged and everything through, like sending in training, like routines that they've been doing, and we've been sharing them on Twitter and things like that just to keep them motivated. And then they've came back, they're playing games. And if you're a kid, you just now think that's life back to normal if that's what you want to do. And then to just say to one of them, you're not allowed to go with your teammates, or you're not allowed to play football anymore because you stay an extra 10 minutes away from somewhere. And I can't see in the grand scheme of things how that one laddie coming in the car with his dad, coming, and they're not in any changing rooms or anything, and we're all COVID compliant, blah, blah. Just gone on and they're saying it's a minimal risk with the kids on the football field. So I don't know how isolating them, because I think you're isolating them mentally, which is a massive thing.
Huge.
And then with the Haddington side, like you've got you're not allowed in any changing rooms or anything. So like we've got a game tonight. I can hear the rain above us, so they're just going to have to jump their cars and that. And there's some teams that have pulled out because they didn't want to go through that. Myself, I would go through it. I'd just go home, and if I'm drenched, I'll be soaking it because I love football that much. But I understand why people wouldn't want to do it as well, because they might catch, like, it's a livelihood in that as well. Like, so if they're catching a cold and they're not getting paid and things like that, I don't know. But it's wreaking havoc everywhere.
It's wreaking havoc. We've heard of clubs. Was it Auchinleck Talbot we were talking about coming before?
There's 14 for the same level as us for the west of Scotland have pulled out. So they're not playing at all this season.
So they're actually doing that to protect the actual club, the future of the club, because if they play, is it one game, they're then the players are getting paid, and obviously they're at the chance of actually, they're at the mercy of losing loads of money. Whereas if they make that decision that, you know what, we're not going to go through this season, they might lose some money, but they don't have the overheads, did they, to go through that season, and they might be able to resume next again year, Scott, and it's frustrating.
That's a big risk, is it? Like, you could get fans that lose interest as well with your local community club. So I don't know if I would have, but I understand what they're doing if they've not got the money to sustain it, because it's killing clubs.
And we've heard this morning reports from Sky Sports that 11 clubs have confirmed that they're teetering on the edge of administration in English football. 11 clubs in English football are facing down the barrel of a gun during the process of having no fans at games. So it is on a daily basis throwing up more and more concerns, not just for football, but obviously in the wider aspect of day-to-day life. Now, Kevin Barry, 67, says that Lenny having a bounce game to get players' fitness and match sharpness shows he is going to set up to win, regardless of who's on the pitch. It's one of these things, and I think it was Joe that said earlier on, Celtic do have a really strong squad, and even with 4 players missing, as well as your James Forrest, maybe Mikey Johnson, I think, is also still missing. So you've got half a dozen first team players missing from that squad. We can still put a team out there at the moment that I would be very confident in winning that game. But again, we are only on the Tuesday. Sean McCrory 8, welcome back to the show, Sean. You are commenting via Twitter and you're calling for a Laxalt debut. I agree with that. Rogic could be a surprise addition, scored against them home, away and Hampden. They certainly wouldn't be expecting Rogic to start, would they, Sean? But I think we'll certainly see an appearance at some stage. And Gary Doonan reminds us that Paul Wilson always done well against Rangers and Jackie Mack against Hibs always did the business. There are certain players who seem to do well against certain teams. And Ken Walsh, welcome back, Ken. Great to hear from you from over in Ireland. And you are saying that we need to unleash Laxalt. I would be very surprised if we don't actually start Laxalt after him coming in as the big name signing that was called the cheap option by Charlie Nicholas. And Charlie's come back out again today, Scott, to say that he stands by his view and that he won't be a media sheep. I don't think it was anything to do with being a media sheep. It's just these facts were totally incorrect. So here we go. Kevin Graham is asking everybody to click the thumbs up for the show. Yeah, all you have to do is give us a thumbs up button, because there's always a few people out there, potentially not Celtic fans, who give us the thumbs down, which isn't nice to see, but I'm sure you can outnumber them. We're looking ahead to Saturday's game. Did I get a prediction off you, Scott?
2-1 Celtic.
2-1 Celtic. And the big questions have been who starts up front for Celtic. If indeed we have the players that we have on Tuesday, come the actual match day, who starts at centre half? Does Jullien get thrown right in? We've currently got a COVID-4. It's 10 months since we last met Rangers. We've been talking to Scott, who's got a good insight into Hibs, and he reckons that perhaps you'll be going for a cup. Now, when you look down the years, Scott, at Hibs, I always think of Hibs as, I don't know, quite a trendy club in terms of the fan base. We look back on ultra culture, we look back on terrace culture. Hibs have always kind of been at the forefront of that, and they had, the casual movement as well back in the 80s. Is that something that still exists at Easter Road in normal times?
I'd be like to say, to be honest with you, but is that the whole thing of that not dying a death now, just with the way the police have got on top of it with the CCTV and everything. Maybe hear some of them like jumping about, but I don't think it's as prevalent as it was in the 80s and the early 90s and that.
Do you think there'll come a point where it gets steered more towards ultra culture, so that people are interested in being part of an ultra movement, which doesn't bring in any kind of the flack that came with the casual movement? Now, there was loads of things to be admired actually with the casual movement, but one thing obviously was the violence that we didn't want to see at football parks and in the surrounding areas. Do you think we're moving towards the groups of people still wanting to belong to a group of football fans, and what goes with that is the fashion and the music and the joint interest and that togetherness, but stripping away the kind of violence and the hooliganism, so they become ultras? And the ultra scene often means that they are supporting other movements as well, sometimes political. So you've still got maybe a mindset of people trying to form smaller groups within fan bases, like-minded people, but it's not for a ruck on a Saturday afternoon. It's more to have some kind of ultra scene. Do you think we're moving towards that?
Or even create a scene that just creates an atmosphere. Let's get a group that does that, because sometimes you can go to Easter Road and it's really quiet. Like I said before, it's all right when the bigger teams come, but if we're playing the lesser teams, there's no away fans. So if we can create a scene that creates an atmosphere, I'm all for that.
Oh, definitely. And there will be no atmosphere at Celtic Park on Saturday, but there will certainly be an atmosphere here at State of Mind Studios. We will be going live at 12 o'clock, half an hour before the game kicks off. We'll be joining you again at half-time, and then for half an hour after. So we will be discussing all the talking points. If the game goes ahead, I'm pretty sure it will, Scott. Even if Celtic only have 13 fit players, I'm sure the game will go ahead. It's been an absolute pleasure for everybody coming on to the broadcast. We do this every day at 12:30. It was slightly later yesterday because our pundit wasn't in the studio and we had to set something up technically, which was beyond my capabilities for an hour. So we will be here again 12:30 tomorrow. Please also join us at 2 o'clock. We will be joined by Johnny Owen, who's an actor, a musician, a DJ, a director, not only of films but a director of football clubs. He's a great guy and he has a Celtic state of mind. So join us at 2 o'clock tomorrow and ask him a few questions because we'll put it out live. But all that's left for me to say, Scott Bonner, thanks for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, a pleasure.